Good morning, everyone. I think we're about ready to go ahead and start our webinar this morning. So joined us, you're here to listen in to our webinar on BRC Issue 8 and the updates from version 7 to version 8. And so I'm going to go ahead and read the bios of the gentlemen that have joined me here this morning. And as we get into details, hopefully we'll answer a lot of your questions and at least give you some background information on some of the changes in the code. So I think it should be a good course, and we do encourage questions. So one of the things that we'll be doing this morning is we are recording. So be aware of that. At the end, we'll leave the microphones open for questions. If you do speak, you'll be recorded. We are taking questions throughout the webinar as well as at the end. If you want to submit them into the chat, you can go ahead and do that. And we will be making the recording of the webinar available afterward. So we will send out information to you after the webinar on how to get a copy of it, and it'll be available later on our website as well. So on the other end of the line, we have John Kukoly from BRC. So he's a senior member of the BRC Global Standards team overseeing marketing and operations across the Americas. John has an engineering degree in food microbiology with over 20 years management experience in the food production and certification industry. And he's had roles in production, quality, engineering, and auditing. So John does bring a wealth of experience and expertise to us and to BRC and the GFSI technical working groups. And we've been happy to have him at our conference for a number of years now. A very interesting guy to talk to. So good morning, John, and welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you.
And Antonio Mungia, my good friend here, we work together here at Safe Food Alliance. And so Antonio has more than 20 years experience in the food safety and quality systems field. He holds a Bachelor of Sciences degree in biochemistry, engineering, and food science. So he's smarter than I am. He's the technical director for Safe Food Certifications, which is our certification body. And so he is an SQF, BRC, gluten-free, and ASQ HACCP certified auditor. Did we miss any?
Well, no.
No, okay.
We're
that's
so
enough for now. It's enough schemes for you. So this position has led him to perform more than 200 food safety audits, and I'm sure it's higher than that now, in over 90 different plants. Antonio also is a Food Safety Modernization Act qualified or lead trainer for the PCQI, as well as the Foreign Supplier Verification Programs rules and the Produce Safety rule as well. So 3 different FSMA courses. So welcome, Antonio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I think we're going to go ahead and jump into the webinar itself now. And so these are the photos that I should have had up while I read the bios. So anyhow, so an overview, John. So can you give us some background information about the most recent updates to the BRC standard in issue 8?
Absolutely, and really want to talk a little bit about some of the background, some of the drivers for it. So it's during the course of this session, we're going to go through a lot of the big changes, the things that people need to get working on and may need some help to work on. But in the meantime, why we make the changes. A couple of things. The GFSI benchmarking document, which is really very important to us, has made some changes. So we wanted to make sure we stay up to date, or even better, stay ahead of where things are going with that. We take a look at global causes of recalls as well, and reasons why some of those things are driving some issues. So we wanted to take a look at some of those things. And during this session, I think if you advance to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the consultation, and you can click through a couple of things here, so you can see who's got the clicker.
That's me.
There we go. A big part of it is as well to take a look at global regulation, look at Food Safety Modernization Act, and there are a lot of good things in there. We're not trying to take everything in, but certainly where there are items that make good sense, we want to bring them in from a global perspective, and as well just make sure that the biggest discussion those of you who've been dealing with food safety over the past couple of years know how important food safety culture, the culture of an organization, and determining how successful and efficacious their programs are. So we really wanted to bring that culture component into the standard. And of course, that last one, we take a look at global recalls around the world. We want to bring them in, specifically one of the biggest two of the biggest drivers have been around product labeling and also foreign material. So we wanted to see if we could make sure that we're using the standard or providing the standard as the best tool for sites to be able to use certification and the process of becoming certified to drive their food safety programs to the best they can be. So that's a little bit of background. One of the things I do like to touch on at this point is the timing, just to make it very clear for everyone. The standard was published itself in August of 2018. There's a copy on that can be downloaded for free off our bookshop. If you're having any challenges with that, get a hold of the good folks at Safe Food Alliance. They'll help you get a copy of it. All of our trainers, our training was updated. Our trainers, Antonio is one of our approved training partners. So, he's up to date and ready to, he's got all the materials to be able to deliver training either on site or in public courses. And the big date is February 1st. And just to be very clear on that one, if your audit starts first day of the audit is before February 1st, it's going to be version 7. If the first day of the audit is February 1st or later, it's going to be version 8, and away you go. So that's just a quick bit on timing.
Great. So can we talk a little bit about updates with regard to management commitment? This has always been a key component of the BRC standard, right? But one of the new components, as you mentioned, is this food safety culture aspect. And it's been kind of a major focus in the food industry the last number of years. We've been talking about this concept of food safety culture and how important it is. And yet it's kind of an intangible that's difficult to measure or to really roll out in the facility. There's a couple of great books out there by Frank Giannis as well that have been out for a couple of years too. So if you can maybe kind of touch on that a little bit and how BRC is approaching that subject.
Yeah, and we see this, management commitment, the whole management piece, that's section 1 of the standard. It's section 1 for a reason. That's the driver of where things go. One of the areas we're going to look at, and this is a change you'll see in the audit, and when Antonio is updating the auditors to be able to do the work, this is going to be another part of the training they give them. But it's going to, the management, and this is the debate we had we debated long and hard as to whether to change it to leadership instead of management, because we felt that spoke a little more clearly. So in a lot of the training, we see the term leadership coming in to kind of start building beyond just the concept of management. We want the leadership to be engaged in the food safety program. We want the leadership to be engaged in the audit process itself. So during the audit, what's going to happen is the auditor themselves they're going to audit, or they're going to interview the senior management. They're going to ask some specific questions about commitment, about objectives, about how do they deliberately plan to produce safe, high quality products that meet their customers' needs. So there'll be a lot of discussion with them, and that'll lead into some of the issues around the organizational culture, how they manage that, and how they set those objectives. And if you go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about culture. So this is the thought process we had behind it. It's fundamental. Everyone knows that. There's no debate about the culture of an organization. And this goes beyond just food safety. The culture of the organization when it comes to staff retention, when it comes to occupational health and safety, when it comes to customer-facing service, all of those things, it's the culture of the organization. It's how they behave every day. We know it's going to be a challenge to audit, but we really wanted to see movement for facilities to get the benefit in their food safety program of having the proper culture. And what does that look like? If you go to the next slide, we're going to start to take a look into the standard itself. Now, this is interesting, and I really like the way this was crafted by our technical working groups and our boards that help us build our standard. They have a clear plan for developing and in the continual improvement of a food safety and quality culture. So note that it covers both food safety and quality, the whole integrity of the product as it is in the customer's or consumer's eyes. And what we look at is, the site has to have a specific activity to understand food safety. So they have to, food safety culture. So they have to be able to measure the culture. They have to be able to decide where they're going to go and how to manage that progress. Very similar to ISO 14001, where you take the perspective of understand what it is, measure where you are, have an action plan to get better, and then could repeat. So as opposed to, and we understood that auditors are not going in there to give you a score on culture. There is no good or bad from a BRC perspective. All there is a continual improvement. So wherever you are in a food safety culture, we have an expectation during the audit that you've got a formal program in place, you're measuring it, you've got plans to move forward with action, you know, with specific dates, who's doing it, and moving forward. Another tie into the reporting or to the culture aspect is communication. And this goes from top to bottom and bottom to top of the organization. What we had a look at was how do you work with that food with the reporting, and how does it connect with the culture of the organization? The message we want all staff to have is that food safety and the quality of the product, the integrity of the product is everyone's responsibility. Everyone has a role to play within their job function. Based on that, everyone needs to know, A, what good and bad look like, and then what to do when that happens. So we added 2 additional clauses. 115 says all staff need to know what their role is in food safety. As you can see here, you guys are good at moving these slides. And the highlighted yellow is really the important part. So every employee, and this is going to, during the audit, what we're going to have is the auditor talking to employees. What's your role? What's your responsibility in maintaining the integrity of the product? And then what do you do if you see, you know, what does bad look like to you? What do you watch out for? And then what do you do? And then 116 takes it a little bit of an extra step. And this is something where I think you're going to see a lot of benefit of going to a training course to be able to discuss what some of the options are for putting this in place. But there has to be a way for everyone in the organization to identify to senior management, there's an issue, without any fear of repercussion. Lots of different ways that can be put in place, but that's going to be an important part of what's required.
Yeah, thanks, John. And and we do have a question from Courtney, and it's coming from the perspective of a smaller company, the president being directly involved with the operation. I think this is a common story with a lot of our clients that are small to medium-sized companies. And how do you measure the culture in a smaller operation like that? And how do you tell if there is a food safety culture? And I don't know, Antonio, do you want to kind of, from the perspective of the auditor, can you kind of tell and how what the culture is? And then John, maybe you can kind of reply as well if you'd like after he's done.
Yeah. Well, as John said, well, there is not going to be like an objective way to do it, right? But it's going to be some sort of a sense that you get throughout the audit. I mean, as it is, I think, you know, in our certification body, we already are practicing that. You know, we're leaving all the senior management commitment piece to the end of the audit, because we're gauging, you know, we're interviewing employees, we're looking at, you know, what are they doing? We are asking them, you know, what kind of issues they have to report, you know, what they do with the waste, what kind of issues they need to bring up to management, and, you know, just the conditions of the plant and the practices that you observe. So really all throughout the audit, you are gauging, you know, really what the culture is, you know, when you review records, and, you know, how people behave, and you see the programs are actually live and implemented and not just there as a, you know, play for the auditor. So it really shows when there is the culture of food safety and quality.
So you can tell a difference between somebody who's been living it all year and somebody who just spent the last 2 weeks getting ready for the audit.
You can tell. And I think, especially for schemes like BRC, you know, it's really hard just to, you know, a week before to prepare a play for the auditor, right? And besides, you know, that's not the intent of having a food safety program like BRC. It's really, you know, to leave the program and to have the results and the benefits, which is, you know, safe food quality, and, you know, obviously, you know, no recalls, not sick people, not dead people out there in the marketplace.
Definitely. John, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, Antonio covered it really well. Small facilities, yes, absolutely. But you mentioned right in the beginning some of the work Frank Yanis has done, and I think that's where it starts, is doing a little bit of research to understand. And there's a lot of material available, a couple of good books, there's some good websites, just to understand what culture is. To Antonio's point, this isn't something you could do 2 weeks before the audit. We don't expect you to have everything in place and complete and done. This is one of those things, kind of like continuous improvement. You're never done. You're always in process. So For a small company, you may be doing something like town halls. You may, but there may be a series of them explaining, training, getting knowledge to the staff of what you're doing, then doing kind of a survey with them. And then based on that survey, you're going to have some action plans and responses to them. That this is going to be an ongoing problem. So culture or program. So culture is, to Antonio's point, absolutely don't look at it as a one-time event. Look at it as a way of doing business.
Great. Thank you, John. All right, so the next section is food safety plan, and there have been some updates in the BRC issue 8 to the food safety plan section. And now, obviously, with FSMA being fully rolled out in the food industry now, and we've got regulations that are similar in Canada and in Mexico and other places. And obviously, you can't change the BRC scheme to be based on FSMA, right? It's always been kind of HACCP based and Codex HACCP founded. So what are the changes here that viewers should be aware of, and how are we evolving as regulations and expectations change?
Well, the cool thing about this is HACCP is HACCP. If you bring it down to its absolute basic, it's, same, very similar to culture. Have the knowledge to understand. So have the individual or the team that's able to understand the functions within the organization and how food safety is managed. Do a risk assessment where you identify all of the potential risks and then have mitigation strategies for them. And whether you're using Codex or you're using the FDA model or the Canadian model, in the end, the outcome should be the same. You've identified what the risks are, and you've got control programs, and you could call them mitigating strategies. You control them CCPs, OPRPs, PRPs, preventive controls, whatever you like. And that's really been where we're putting a lot of emphasis on the food safety plan portion of the standard, and it's through training. And again, the primary outreach is with the auditors. And what we're saying is, focus on the mitigation. Have they identified the risks, and have they got the appropriate validated mitigation strategies in place? If they do that, yes, you have to meet regulations. We're not going to, we're not holding the auditors to look for any particular terminology or structure of the standard. So if you look through BRC section 2, you see all of the bits and pieces. You need to have a team. The team has to be competent. Well, that translates very easily into an FDA regulated plant because that's the PCQI. And you've got the same, so you're looking for the same thing, right? You're looking for a competent individual who understands both the process and the food safety plan development and management to be able to move that forward. So although we haven't really made significant, the changes we've made have been primarily for the allowance of regulated HACCP type programs or food safety programs and how they are able to be used in the context of a BRC standard. What we don't want to have, last thing we want to have is where you have two binders on the shelf. You've got the BRC HACCP plan and you've got the FDA preventative controls plan. We want you to have one food safety plan, and the auditor is going to be able to audit that to meet regulation and to look at all the parts that are required in the BRC standard.
And we have seen both approaches, haven't we, Antonio? We've seen folks that integrate, and we've seen folks that have separate plans that are basically mirrored, one for FSMA, one for preventive controls, the other for BRC, HACCP based, and even some that have a third plan for USDA.
Oh, but yeah, I won't speak to you. Sometimes USDA, FDA don't get along, and they can have some different requirements. That could be a bit of a challenge. But our expectation is that during the BRC audit now, BRC auditor should be able to look at a preventive controls plan, and if done properly, all of the parts should be there to satisfy the needs of the BRC standard as well.
So you want to add to that?
Well,
Antonio?
I mean, yeah, what going around and doing the audits, what I've seen is, when people marry, I call it marrying the two programs, the preventive controls and HACCP, basically you get the same results, right? The only variation is actually when they identify preventive control that is not in process. And, but, I think, they're covered by BRC anyway, because if they have, for instance, a critical ingredient that they are sourcing, and they have identified that in their plan, and they have all the type of controls, verification of the supplier, approval, and whatnot. Basically, they are following BRC, but also at the same time, they're complying with, with the FDA requirement, which is just have appropriate controls for the types of hazards and that you identified. So that's the approach that we've been taking, during the audit. We're not looking for specific terms. Oh, you didn't call this a preventive control or that. No, it's doing the job. That's what it is.
At the end of the day, it's about effectiveness,
Yeah,
not what you call it, right?
Exactly, not the label.
Yeah.
But just that there is that control for it. Where required.
Perfect.
Definitely. So internal audits. This is the next section here. And so as I understand, there's some changes to that section as well. Internal audits really have always been one of the most effective tools we have in the food plant for verifying things, even in some cases, validating controls sometimes as well if we do a thorough internal audit. And so it's one of the most important tools in our toolbox. So can you kind of talk about what's changing here, John?
Yeah, you described that perfectly. I mean, so between, I think, supplier audits and supplier approval and internal audits, if you can get those right and you've got a good culture, things should be ticking along extremely well. One of the challenges to your, and I agree with what you said, the internal auditing should be looked at as a skill set and a toolbox. And if you haven't had training in internal auditing or audit skill sets, that's something I would, folks at Safe Food Alliance do a good job with those courses. I think that's something that never fails you. And it doesn't matter whether you're in maintenance, whether you're in accounting, or whether you're in food safety or quality assurance, the ability to do a good internal audit. And if you break that down to what it really is, we pay people every day to do activities. At some point, it's well worth reviewing that and saying, are the activities being done as we expect? And B, is it giving us the outcome we really want? So that's what internal auditing really tries to answer. It's taking an expected procedure, let's say receiving, making sure that people who are doing that job are doing it as per the procedure, but then also taking a look at, is that successfully giving us what we want? And that's received goods that are added, that are not bringing in additional risks to our facilities. So what we've done from a internal audit requirement, and if you jump to the next one, we'll take a look at that. Sure. Well, there's our best practice guide, and that's available on our Participate program as well. But we've simply added that shaded section. At a minimum, the program shall include at least 4 different activity dates. Now, to be very clear, this does not mean you take the BRC standard out 4 times a year and you go through and you do a bunch of checks. Yes. This means, again, this is one of those long debates we have of how do we slowly but surely bring internal auditing up to be more and more effective. In reality, it'd be great to be doing internal auditing every week, not just 4 times a year. But what we expect is that there are a series of events throughout the year that split up the internal auditing process so that you're creating that culture and that mindset of we're always going to be ensuring we're doing the right thing and that the things we're doing are working, giving us the results we want. So it's really changing that mindset. And the previous version of the standard, the one we're on right now, said the internal audit should be split throughout the year. Now we're saying, okay, split now means at least as a minimum 4 different activities. But maybe the best, a simple example would be, let's go back to the receiving concept. You've got, let's say you've got 12 different people who could possibly work in that job. If you were to take the procedure down, watch one of them do it, sign off that procedure, challenge them, ask the questions, do your typical internal audit process with them. That's great. Now we've verified that person is effectively doing what they're expected to do. But there's 11 more. So if you did that once a month, that means every year you would be verifying your internal audit process for the people that are doing it. If you only did that once a year, you would go 12 years between ensuring each individual is qualified to do that job, which you can see. And that's how you can start to understand we need to do this more as an ongoing activity as opposed to an event once a year, a little more frequently.
Yeah. And what do you see on the field, Antonio, in terms of the biggest gaps with internal audits?
I think one of the biggest gaps is like, this is such a valuable tool and it's been underused for the purpose. I've seen sometimes facilities that basically just go doing some sort of a checklist, but really not focusing in all the moving parts of a procedure or a program. So I see, you know, when there is just a check box that's checked instead of having the evidence. So, you know, I interview this employee, and, you know, I review this SOP, the records, you know, that pertain to that program. So looking at the all moving parts of that program and or that procedure, you know, that's the part that I see missing a lot. You know, that it's not just, you know, go on audit document or just talk to a person. It's a full round activity. And also what I've seen is sometimes companies go and do, okay, well, let's do just this on this time of the year and take care of it, right? And well, it happens that sometimes activities are not happening the whole year, and you just have the chance to see it once. Let's say, for instance, receiving of a raw agricultural commodity, right?
It's only seasonal,
It's
right?
only seasonal,
Yeah.
so you just have certain time when you can actually audit your receiving portion of the program. So, you know, those are the types of things. So I think another one is, you know, the training or of the internal auditors. I think the understanding of the task, what they actually should be doing. I think that's also a gap that I see a lot in out there in the industry.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And, you know, you can approach internal audits different ways, right? So at the bare minimum, going out and just kind of taking a glimpse of a process on one particular day might be an internal audit, but maybe you're just verifying what's going on that day as a snapshot. And you're basically asking the question, are we following the program this day? Right? But really what you'd ultimately want to do, if you can, is answer the question, not just are we doing it on this day, but are we doing it throughout the year? And not only that, but is it working? Right? And that's kind of the heart of validation, isn't it? So I could easily go audit metal detection, right? Check one person on day shift and see what they're doing, look at the records for that day. Well, yes, technically that's an internal audit, but it's one snapshot, right? Now, if I go dig through a deeper dive of records, if I talk to people on every shift, if I check their training records, if I review customer complaints for metal and look at everything I can, you can almost argue, hey, you know, that's part of my validation of that process now because I've taken such a deep dive. Wouldn't you say, John?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's the key. There's not an absolute barrier between validation and verification. And sometimes a series of verifications or a trend in verifications that adds to your validation pile. So absolutely, they're connected.
And we did have a quick question, John, maybe I'll throw this out to you. I schedule my internal audits throughout the year. Am I already following this requirement for 4 times a year?
When you say schedule throughout the year, if there's at least 4 distinct events, then yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you. All right, so supply chain, right? So this really kind of tends to be one of the most significant concerns in the food industry because a lot can happen upstream that we're not aware of. And in fact, you know, hopefully it's becoming a less and less common practice, but in the past, we've kind of had this commoditizing of raw materials and ingredients where we buy them from a broker or somebody we don't even know where it's coming from or who made it. You know, maybe it's an unlabeled box, it's got a sticker on it or something like that. And I think BRC has always expected a lot more than that. And now, of course, with the Food Safety Modernization Act as well, we've got supply chain preventive controls that we have to have in place in many cases. In a recent event, right, we had these vegetables that were contaminated with listeria and salmonella, and there's a whole chain of events where all these products are being recalled now because of this. So maybe if you could talk a little bit, John, about kind of the reasons why and what the changes are in regard to supply chain with BRC.
Absolutely. I mean, for us, when we look at supply chain, it's about the safety, the integrity, legality, the quality of the raw materials. And I mean, if you compare it to, you know, pest control, you don't leave all the doors open and then try to catch the pests when they come in. You don't have your shipping doors open, bring in whatever you can buy at a good price, and then try to figure out how to make it good or make it safe or prevent it from being a problem. You really want to push your containment wall out to the next level. So if you're including your suppliers, if you're saying, you know what, I'm getting trusted materials from trusted suppliers, I have a lot less issue coming in to deal with within my walls. So what we did, we went through a lot of the requirements, did some some smaller updates, but everything effectively raised the bar. And this is one of the updates you can see. We use the term, you're going to see the term primary packaging come in, and I'll speak to that in a moment. But we're looking at things, you know, when you do your risk assessment of raw materials, yes, the micro, chemical, biological, but what about variety or species cross-contamination, deliberate or unintentional, as well as any legislative controls around raw materials, making sure they're covered. You know, some of this speaks to FSMA. And then when you need to update that. So again, we talk about if there's an issue, if that raw material has been implicated, you know, if you spoke specifically of vegetables, we see a big recall in vegetables going on. We need to go back to our risk assessment at this point and say, are we covered? It didn't happen to us. We didn't get caught up in this, but it happened to some of our competitors or some of our compatriots in the industry. How did we? Is it luck, or is it because of our program is good enough that we missed it? And so two pieces, adding a little bit more what we're looking for, and then how off or what triggers us to go back and take a look at that. And then we'll move to the next slide. And I mentioned primary packaging, and you know, this is where you just have to say everybody's got their own definition of primary packaging. We used to simply say packaging, and the first question everybody asked was, well, which packaging is included? We're being much clearer about it now. We use the term primary packaging, and what we mean by primary packaging is everything that goes into the customer's or consumer's operation. So if it's a consumer package, everything the consumer brings into their home is what we consider primary packaging. Don't confuse that with contact packaging or primary contact. Okay. This is simply primary. So if the consumer brings it into their home, we're going to put that on primary packaging. That goes on the supplier approval list. Remember, all that does now is says state that we have to have a supplier approval mechanism based on risk. Now, for business to business, those primary packaging is effectively defined as everything that goes into the production operation. So not the pallet, not the shrink wrap, but if they bring a 50-pound bag of flour with a label on, both those pieces would be considered primary packaging. So that's where that, and you can see it coming up in this next section as well. So what is supplier approval? Obviously, you know, one of the best supplier approvals, those of you who are certified to a GFSI standard understand the benefits of that. So BRC or one of the other GFSI benchmark programs understand they're not all the same. So some cover safety, some cover safety and quality. So if quality is important to you and you're using a GF and your supplier has a certification that doesn't include quality, how are you covering off on that requirement as well? Or, you know, someone can do a supplier audit. It could be you, it could be a certification body like Safe Food Alliance as a second party audit, could be any version of that, but it has to cover some basic things, traceability, product safety, there has to be a food safety plan, and you want to see what that report is. We also want to see how the auditors are qualified. So are they sending in a generalist, or you know, like if you speak to Antonio, he's very specialized in his knowledge and his categories that he audits because he has an advanced level of understanding of them. For suppliers, we still allow questionnaires for suppliers determined to be low risk. You have to define and prove what low risk is for the organization. And I think there's, no, that's the last slide on supplier approval. So you can see the bar's upped a little bit. We've added a few more things to look at. We've added some triggers to say, go back and look at your risk assessment. And here we're saying, you know what, we should be pushing our supply chain towards GFSI, or at the very minimum, a second party audit, and step back a little bit from those questionnaires.
So I know you have a wealth of experience, Antonio, in the field with different things related to you know, supply chain during the audits that you've done, right? And whether somebody's buying directly from a farmer, whether they're buying something that's been refined and processed, a seasoning mix or something like that. So you want to add anything as far as supply chain and some of the things to watch out for? Some of the...
Well, I think the most important thing that I've seen out there is sometimes, you know, when we do our risk assessments, you know, the standard calls for, you know, an ingredient or group of ingredients. And what I've seen sometimes is like they group ingredients or commodities that physicochemically, or, you know, they're not the same. Yeah. The physicochemical characteristics are not the same. The food safety rationale is not the same. So it doesn't make any sense to group them together, because then you might not be taking care of all of the hazards that one of those materials has, opposite to another one that may not be. So we really need to apply some sense into, when we group these ingredients, that they're similar in food safety rationale. So that's, I think, the biggest advice that I would give to the industry, to really pay attention to that. When you group things together, you may be losing, a good important factor on the safety of the product.
Definitely. So if I'm buying, let's say, some corn flour, some masa, and some nacho cheese flavoring, some black pepper, some salt, and then in my hazard analysis, I have a listing for ingredients, then I'm missing the boat, right?
Yes,
because each
totally.
one of those is unique and it may have different risks that we need to assess, right?
Exactly.
And one of the things that I often direct people to now with the issuing of preventive controls, there is a guidance out there, and it's the main primary guidance for the preventive controls rule. And they have an appendix 1 where they list out different likely hazards based on products, based on processes. They'll start out with the pathogens, the micro, and then they've also got physical and chemical listed as well. And so it's what FDA considers likely hazards that you need to look at a minimum in your hazard analysis, based on FDA's past experience with recalls and things. So it's an absolutely great tool. It's out there on their website for free. You go to the FSMA page, click on preventive controls, and go to Appendix 1 on the guidance. We can send out information on this later after the webinar. Any of the other resources we talk about as well, we'll send out. So Frank Giannis' 2 books, we can probably link to those on Amazon or something and send that out afterwards as well. So yeah, I don't know, John, if you want to add anything to that or not, but we actually have a question from the audience here too as well. So I'll run this by you, John, and maybe get your response. What do you think about blockchain for traceability, cost versus practical and security? Do you think it will be applied in the future, and will it be required in standards such as BRC? And that's a big topic to talk about, isn't it, John?
Yeah, blockchain. If you, again, break it down to its very simplistic form, it's a secure repository of information that follows the product. So if I'm, potentially, if I'm in a retail store buying fish sticks, I should be able to see all the details of, where it was made, where the fish was processed, where the fish was caught, all the way down, all that information. 2 pieces to blockchain. One, it relies on good information going in. So I think we're still working on how to ensure that only good information gets in. There's no point in having a blockchain of information that doesn't satisfy or is not quality information. So I think the blockchain concept is something that will certainly help. I think it's got a long way to go on things. I think in certain specific captive commodity groups, I think it's going to have a huge potential. The one example that we all saw was the mango concept. So you could do blockchain for mangoes coming out of a specific region, and that way you can capture all the information and link it together to say that we're going to say there's visibility of linking every ingredient of every manufacturer around the world together at this point in a secure environment. I think we've got a little ways to go, but certainly it's one of those topics that's continue to bubble.
Yeah, I think you answered that very well, John. I think the benefits of blockchain are security of the information and just the quickness, the efficiency of being able to pull up information. Right, I was listening to an interview with Frank Giannis. He was talking about, I think it was mangoes. It was the example.
Yeah.
Walmart is looking into this, and he was saying that a traceability exercise that previously would have taken, I think, a week or 2, brought it down to like what was it, an hour or 2. Oh,
it's amazing what it can do, but it relies on a very secure and captive set of information.
Mm-hmm. But as you said, it's garbage in, garbage out. So it relies on putting in good information in the first place. So if they're not recording good information on the physical copies now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be putting good information in electronically, right? It relies on good data to start with, and that's part of the problem too. Is if we're not currently tracking it, start tracking it, whether it's paper-based, whether it's electronic, right? So I don't myself think that we'll ever see blockchain being required specifically as a technology by BRC or anybody else. It'll be more of an example of one of those tools that's out there that maybe will take off and many people use it, but it's not typically something that a lot of schemes would say you have to use this or you have to use that. Right.
Yep.
So, yeah, definitely. So, so food defense and site security, right? So there's some changes here. And again, this is another subject of one of the FSMA regulations. And so the compliance date for the intentional adulteration rule is coming up this summer. I think it'll be the last rule to pass for food processors for most of them. And so, you know, what are the BRC requirements doing to help food processors with this and with compliance with the regulation? And would you say that the requirements are equivalent, or would you say they're kind of a little different?
Well, in the new version, I think we're going to be pretty much equivalent. One of the challenges with food defense is, you know, when we usually do risk assessments, you pull out that nice little matrix, you know, the severity versus likelihood. And the problem with something like food defense is the likelihood is infinitesimal if you look on historical evidence, and the severity is unbelievable if you look at the potential. So our typical risk assessment mechanisms of developing a program like this don't work that well in food defense. Very similar in food fraud as well. So we have to start thinking a little bit differently when we bring in this type of risk assessment program. So what we wanted to do is, yes, make sure we've made some changes in the way we look at it. A little bit driven by GFSI, a little bit driven by the Food Safety Modernization Act on intentional adulteration. But a couple of things. We need to have a documented plan. It has to be based on the flow diagram of the organization, so not just a bubble around the organization to prevent external threats from coming in, but also look at those internal threats as well. So that's really what we want to make a change is bring in the internal threats and combine all of the malicious contamination, theft threats, as well as typical, more traditional thought of food defense objectives.
So, Antonio, what do you look for during an audit to see that companies have met the requirements of the food defense section, and what sort of things would people need to do for compliance with this?
Well, currently, since this is the part of the food defense is not really like required like as per issue 8, but currently, like, you know, facilities are most focused on the site security, you know, making sure that they control personnel, who access, visitors, contractors, you know, the drivers, employees, training, surveillance systems, access control, and all these kinds of things. So, and also the reporting of, you know, malicious activity or any suspicious kind of situation or condition or behavior inside the processing areas or storage areas. Mm-hmm. So that's basically what I've seen companies, you know, doing so far. These new requirements are gonna add up to that, you know, because now you're gonna be required to look at every step of the process if it's gonna be based on the flow diagram and see how things could be, what threats can be there and how they could be mitigated if present.
Yeah, you know, and you really can, with the BRC standard, implement it in a way where, hey, we just want this piece of paper so we can sell product to a bigger market, or you can really apply it in the way it's intended and you'll see huge benefits for your company and risk. And this is what we need to communicate to as food safety managers to upper management is the benefit versus the cost of these things. And I think a lot of food safety and quality managers find it challenging to communicate that, right? But I was working with a client recently that rolled out their GFSI program for the first time. And to meet this clause, they went through and they did an assessment of their facility, and they found something like 15 different ways that people could get into their facility fairly easily. And you know, and so when I did the audit, you know, they came to me and they said, wow, this was hugely beneficial because we found all these things that we, you know, needed to fix. And just showing that to management, saying, look at all these ways that we really need to button up the facility. We had no idea, and look at the benefit for us. And maybe, you know, it's not going to be, you know, $10,000 tomorrow, right? But there's a huge benefit that's really tangible there when you really apply these things.
Absolutely. Yeah, it speaks almost to enterprise risk assessment, because, you know, if in the case of a true food defense issue, the likelihood of that organization surviving is, you know, may not be there. So how do you measure that in a cost benefit ratio?
Yes, definitely. All right, so we just talked about food defense, right? And I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about food fraud as well. But these two concepts, I hear them being used interchangeably a lot, John and Antonio, and I know they're quite different. And thank you, Antonio. And so food defense versus food fraud, is this a potato kind of thing, or are they quite different? And maybe we can kind of talk about that and expound on that a little bit.
Oh boy, you're right, they blur. So, you know, traditionally food defense is intention to do harm. So you're trying to hurt a person, or you're trying to hurt a group of people, or you're trying to hurt a company, whereas food fraud is generally economically motivated. I'm just trying to rip somebody off. You're right, they blur. You know, you look at the two of the biggest items that started out as food frauds. Number of years ago in China, the melamine tainted milk powder, and a couple of years ago, I think now in Asia, where we saw cumin being adulterated with being cut with peanut shells. So, you know, they were just trying to make a buck. So they were trying to water down a valuable spice commodity by adding essentially rubbish. But because you chose an allergen, it actually became a health issue, or a food safety issue. So, you know, although harm wasn't intended, harm was a consequence. So where do you drop that one? Is that purely food fraud? Is that purely food defense? Or is it, you know what, it ended up being the same thing? Generally, someone who's willing to undertake food fraud is not going to be overly concerned about the health implications. So you can see them cross barriers very, very quickly. What we've done on it, as I said, you know, we've added, we've kept them as two separate, but we understand that they blend very easily. The threat assessment, that could be one document that covers both fraud and defense, or it could be two separate. But we want to see to make sure that assessment covers both internal and external. And then, as Antonio mentioned, the access control is probably one of the biggest keys, especially for the internal threats, and even the external. If you have a secure perimeter, you've controlled the access, so you've limited the ability for things to come in.
Great. Do you want to touch on this at all, Antonio? A little bit on food fraud?
Yeah, I think, you know, going around, I've seen companies that they've done, you know, pretty good job in regards of their vulnerability assessment for fraud. You know, it totally looks like they went to participate in BRC, and they got the model from there, and they came out with a very nice done assessment. And you know, because of that assessment, they were able to come with a plan. And I think also I've been in facilities where they've tried to do that assessment, but they miss the point because they just kind of like recognize things, but they don't you know, land that in a plan. Say, okay, well, I recognize all these, you know, factors that it could be a you know, a threat for the integrity of our product, but there is not a plan in place recognizable. Okay, you know, maybe the variety thing, the species. Oh, but what are you gonna do about it? How are you gonna recognize, and how are you gonna mitigate it? So that's where I've seen the ball dropped a little bit, you know, and the intended result of that analysis. So that's one of the things. And the other one is like also when they do claims, you know, sometimes they focus too much into, okay, nothing that's gonna come and adulterate my product from the, you know, what is it, dilution or substitution and things like that. But what about the other ones? Like if you claim in your finished product that you are GMO free, or you are like gluten free, or you're organic, and that, so, you know, how are you gonna, you are analyzing your threats and the vulnerability on those claims from your supplier point of view.
Yeah.
So that I also see it a little bit, unaddressed on the plans.
Yeah, definitely. They really are different things to me, because, food defense, protecting the facility, and food fraud, looking at your supply chain stream, are kind of two different things, although they can blend together. But, I mean, I always kind of joke around, salmonella can be free range and organic. So,
well
it
put.
kind of is. So,
Yeah.
I apologize for the dad humor there, but, so it's definitely, I tend to like to kind of separate them and really think about them. And one of the great websites out there is foodfraud.org. It was run by USP for a number of years, and now another company has taken it over, and I can't recall off the top of my head, but foodfraud.org. You can go in and you can look up smoke flavoring or wine. Pinot Noir wine is in there because in the past, there was more Pinot Noir being produced out of France than they physically had vines to produce. And this was after the movie Sideways came out years ago and it became suddenly popular. So, but again, that's not a harmful thing, right? And so that's the difference to me between FSMA and BRC, right? Is FSMA is focused with regard to food fraud on just harmful things, like the peanut and the cumin was the example I always use, John. I'm glad you went to that. But BRC is also focused on quality aspects that can still be harmful to the food company and even to the consumer in terms of value that they're getting if they're being defrauded by being sold an inferior product, right? So BRC isn't just about, is there an allergen, but is there something that's going to deteriorate the quality?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. So the next section here, John, controlling physical contaminants. I would think by now the food industry would have it figured out, right? But we know how to get physical contaminants out of our food. And yet it still is a real issue, isn't it, right? I mean, people still make mistakes, right? Things fall out of pockets. There are processing errors. So can you talk about kind of what's going on here?
This was absolutely an odd one for us. Remember right in the beginning, I said some of the drivers for the changes we've made in the 8th version. We've seen an uptick over the past number of years to a point where physical contamination of products causing recalls or causing harm has become a significant issue. If you break it down, so rather than saying simply let's compare micro to chemical to physical, when you start looking at specific categories within each of those, a couple of things popped right up on the physical contamination. One was product packaging becoming a part of the contamination. Specifically, the business-to-business packaging, contaminating product, and the other one is small utensils, primarily writing instruments. The number of recalls and problems in industry around the world caused specifically by those has jumped up, and as part of what we do with the standard is try to make sure we try to make the standard very risk-based, but at times, little things like this jump up and we say, prescriptively, let's put something in place to make sure that that's not going to come to haunt any of the BRC certified sites. So if you look at the next slide, we'll look at the specific requirements. Nice and simple. 4961, don't let the ingredient packaging become part of the product. So look at the process, do your risk assessment on how we remove packaging from our ingredients, and are there any risks we have to put controls in place to prevent losing some of that packaging, whether it's closures or whether it's plastic bags or whether it's outer layers. How do we manage those? And the other one is, as I said, writing utensils. I mean, and that's straightforward. Make sure that whatever you're using for writing utensils are as least likely as possible to become contaminated. Yes, where they're stored, but also what they're made out of. If you've got a metal detector and you want to make sure that the pen has enough metal in it that should someone lose a pen, it's going to trigger a metal detector, and you can say, okay, there's something wrong. We can now investigate and try to capture where that all went. So very simple, straightforward, but just to the point, prescriptive requirements on let's not let these things become a problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I've seen, facilities that actually take like even further steps on this. Like for instance, they're like metal detecting their earplugs or any other PPE that, could end up in the product. So, they're taken seriously.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly the way to look at it. All those little bits and pieces that are around in the operation are big risks for us.
Yeah, you definitely want to minimize random items that are floating around out there as much as you can to begin with, right? And then put measures in place to prevent them from getting into the product. And John, I recall a number of years ago now seeing I get these FDA recall notices in the email, and oh my goodness, it's too many to count. It seems like now, right? All these different things coming through. But
yeah,
a number of years ago, there was one for being recalled for the possibility of metal and/or plastic in the product. And I thought, okay, I've got to click this one. So I clicked on it and read through to the details. And it was a product where a pen had gotten into the equipment. As you said, John, pens, right? Metal and/or plastic. It got chopped up in there. And so, there may be people out in the market who, if they open their product up, they're going to find a piece of metal or a piece of plastic or both. Not to mention the ink, which probably is not something you want to consume.
Probably not food safe. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we use only food grade ink, right? It's made from blueberries.
There we go.
Right. So
No soy.
yeah, no soy.
Not soy. Yeah, soy-based ink. Good point.
So environmental monitoring. This is one that some companies really do a great job on, right? One that some companies really, don't necessarily dig into as much detail or aren't as thorough as they could be. And of course, it's got to be based on risk, right? But John, I'll let you talk about that and what's changing here.
Yeah, this was again another one of those odd ones we came to, and in the previous version, Antonio, you'll probably remember this. I think it was in version 7 we introduced it, or maybe in 6. One of the questions that we or one of the issues we realized was nowhere in our standard did it say the plant shall be clean. And you think, well, gee, it's a food safety standard. Of course it's going to be clean. And auditors would audit to that, but there was no specific, and that was just for an ease of auditing. So if an auditor noticed that the cleanliness or sanitation of an organization on an ongoing basis wasn't up to par, they would give them a non-conformance, but there was no clear spot where you put that. So we a couple of versions ago, we put in the plant has to be maintained clean. This is the same issue. It's not like we never expected environmental monitoring programs before. We always thought they would be captured in the risk assessment. So in your HACCP plan, you'd identify environmental source pathogens in the production area as a risk, and there'll be mitigating strategies in place. This brings a little more clarity to it on the expectation, and I'll be honest, it ups the bar a little bit. So we wanted to make sure that this was clearly identified. So we've got a new section on environmental monitoring. We want it to be, and we want it to be managed well. And this is not it. This is not the entire set of requirements. We'll talk to some of them a little more depth, but it breaks down to this simply. If you look at this slide and follow this slide, you'll know exactly what you need to do from a BRC perspective, from a really world-class environmental monitoring program. First of all, look at that. Oh no, go back.
Oh, sorry, John.
That's okay. Look at that highlighted place in the back. Shall be in place for pathogens or spoilage organisms. So let's not have an environmental monitoring program that only covers pathogens and then let our shelf life deteriorate because we're not looking at spoilage. Identify what's important to us, and let's use those in our environmental monitoring program. Covers all open, ready-to-eat products as a minimum. Obviously, anywhere else where environmental contamination is an issue is going to come into play. But there are 3 clauses, very simply stated, broken down. That first one, I'm going to get you to go back for a second because I just want to touch on those. The first one is, number 1, the program is properly designed, and expect that to be where the auditor spends the majority of their time. What does this tell me? What your program is, and why is it the way it is, and why is it appropriate for this operation? Secondly, making sure there's appropriate limits and corrective actions. And thirdly, how do we know if it's working right? So now we'll move on to the next slide. And we'll talk about 4.11.8.1, but we really want to understand what the site's thought process is. How did you identify how many samples to take, how frequently, and where you take them from? What was the determining factor? What organisms are you choosing? How are you doing the testing? How are you validating your testing? And then what are you doing with results? And remember that results, there are 2 pieces. I took a swab. Here's the result of the swab. Fine, that's a piece. But then over time, the trend of those swabs from various locations or looking at different trends are equally important. So we want to make sure that the information is being assessed in both of those ways. So big key here is be ready for the auditor to challenge about why you have the program you have and why it's so good. Now we'll go to the next slide. Very simple, the controls. Here's the big hint on making sure that your limits are defined. Make sure that whatever limits you've identified are legal and meet your customer requirements. Last thing you want to do, and this is typically what we see an issue in, is they've set requirements or limits for a environmental monitoring program, and they've got a customer requirement that's tighter, or they haven't even met the regulatory requirements. So make sure that's in there, as well as the corrective action. So what happens if? And then the third one jumps out. So this goes somewhere else, and this talks to lab results. So you've got an environmental monitoring program. At the very least, you're going to be going to an outside lab for some validation support at some point. You may be having an outside lab doing the testing, but they need to, that communication now, because we've got a chain of events that have to happen and different organizations that have to be involved. We want to make sure that the results that come back are assessed. Remember, individual results plus trend, and that we make sure we manage them. And then we'll go on to the third one, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John, I'm just going to pause you. I apologize. Just for a second, we've just hit the 1 hour mark. I know that some of our attendees may need to go. So we'll continue this. We will make the recording available. There will be a shout out at the end of the webinar too as well. So if you have to leave right now, please note, we do have our annual conference coming up. John will be there, right, John?
Yep, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
And we've got a couple of web-based courses available now, including environmental monitoring, internal auditing, root cause analysis, and we're bringing HACCP later this year live as well. So it'd be the full HACCP course. So, and we'll again mention those at the end, but I just wanted to make sure that if anybody has to leave now, we're going to make this available to you later. So, was it this slide now, John? We're ready to.
Nope. Go back one, and we'll. And this really talks about, and this is true of any risk assessment. You do a risk assessment, do it well, but you're going to have to go back and revisit it. It should have an expiry date. The easy expiry is, okay, once a year, we're going to go take a look at it. Our HACCP plan, we say once a year. Our food defense plan, once a year, we're going to go back and take a look at it. And there should also be some indicators that the program's not working. We need to go take a look. So what we want to see is that there are triggers in place that should, big change in process in the facility, change in the science, a failure of the product that wasn't identified in the environmental monitoring program, and that could include things like, remember, pathogens and loss of shelf life. And that last one is an interesting one. We've got an environmental program. We've been testing for this for 10 years. We've never had a positive result. I'm not, look at an environmental monitoring program like internal auditing. It should be something that's always driving you to get a little better. If you've had a long history of not finding anything, that's all you've got, a long history of not finding anything. You're not saying nothing's there. You're simply saying you're not finding anything. So that should challenge you to go back and say, let's take a look at our program. Is it designed to do what it's supposed to do? So that covers off environmental auditor.
Yeah, definitely. So do you want to add anything? No?
Nope.
We always talk about environmental monitoring in our training, and we tell people the policy should be seek and destroy, right?
That's it.
If you're walking the same corner of the same table every time and you never find anything, well, that's great, but what about the rest of the facility, right? In fact, was it Don Zink has spoken at some events. He used to work at FDA and has talked about how when they go into facility as FDA and they go into swab, and they see a facility that's just kind of swabbing the top of the table, they know they typically find things. But if they go in a facility and the people doing the swabbing in the facility are crawling under that deep, dark corner under the table behind the machine, and they're swabbing, trying to find it, if it's there, wherever it could be, because if it's there, we want to know and we want to destroy it, right? And if they go into a facility like that, they typically didn't find problems. And I think that's a huge lesson for all of us.
Yeah, and I guess just thinking twice, I want to say something. Sometimes, I come across a very good and well thought that, environmental monitoring programs, and, they're reviewed and they are like, trended and whatnot. They're really a living program. But sometimes they go into facilities where really, I think, like, this program is designed not to find anything.
And that's a good one, Antonio. And that's where that first clause about the auditor really challenging the program design.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think that defeats the whole purpose of that. Just wasted money, wasted resources. Because if it is there, you want to find it. You want to find it, and as John said, you want to destroy it, not just pretend, oh, it's not here.
Well, somebody's going to find it. You're right. It's much better for you to take it and to find it in a controlled environment and then get rid of it than someone else to find it for you.
Yeah, and like someone said, I'm gonna quote, and I forgot who did it, but they said, in a wet facility, if you're not finding listeria, it's because you're not looking hard enough.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing. I know I've commonly seen companies that have a program, and they'll say, okay, we swab 30 swabs once a quarter, right? So the problem is you're looking once a quarter, right? I always tell them, at the very least, divide that up, even if it's the same number of swabs, because you don't want to spend more money, at least do it weekly, something like that, because really you need to be looking for it. And things change a lot in 3 months, a lot. New employees, new traffic patterns, new weather. Everything can change. So John, you have a few more updates for us, right? A little more information on some upcoming training and things. And of course, now that we've taken this 1-hour webinar on the changes to BRC, we know everything we need to know about the new issue 8, right, John?
Not a chance. The whole point of this webinar, and I really commend you guys for hosting this, it's about, and we're going to come back to internal reporting in a second, it's about identifying what you need to know. So we didn't explain everything you need to know about environmental monitoring. What we have said is expect an auditor to come and really kind of tear apart your environmental monitoring program design and the trend analysis of your results and what you're doing about that. So, forewarned, that's not something, as Antonio said before, it's not something you're going to do in a couple of weeks. This is going to take a fair bit of time to get ready. So treat this as more of a heads up on other things you're going to have to do rather than just where, now that you know everything you need to know. You know what you need. You now know what you didn't know before. So now you have to go and implement and figure out how it's going to work in your facility. So we'll go on now. Couple of changes, and this is outside of the protocol. This is just a little heads up for people. We've had so many requests to be able to get formalization because people use our directory quite as an information sharing portal. This is almost like a mini blockchain where there's verified information that's held in a secure environment, and we've had this request for a long time to be able to get those kind of an early warning up for facilities so that they can see the official document right on their own platform. So what we've allowed now or created with our new directory that's coming out is the auditor, instead of just leaving the nonconformities at the site when they leave, they're going to actually post that onto the site's their profile on our platform. So the site has that official copy. Should they have a customer that wants to see it, they can now share it in a secure environment. If they don't have anybody that is asking for that interim report, then of course they don't share it with anybody and it just stays with themselves. So nice, simple little change for our new directory. We are rebuilding our global markets program. Very cool things you're doing with it right now. Significantly reduced cost of getting onto the program. It's allowing some guidance from the auditors to take place and also getting it in Spanish and Portuguese. So big improvements for that. That FSMA, we are on our newest. So originally we came out with the FSMA that looked only at preventive controls. Now this new version, which we just released in August, covers all of the regulations, and we've done the review against version 8. It's simply going to move into version 8, so there'll be no changes on this as we move into version 8. It's hugely popular. I mean, people use it, download it simply as a guidance tool for themselves. A lot of them want to tack it onto their audit. It adds, I think, Antonio, you've done a number of these. It adds a little bit more time to the audit, but then you've got the auditor, who's a recognized professional, creating a document showing those additional evidence for the customers to show that they're meeting food safety, all of the requirements in FSMA.
And just for the attendees, we do have a number of questions coming in. I'm conserving those until the very end because we're almost done with the slides here, and then I promise we'll get to your questions at the end here. So John, the last section here is where can we go for more information about these changes to get training, right? So there's a couple of slides you've got in there, and then we've got a few slides of our own in there on some of our upcoming events.
Yep, I'm just going to speak to more generics. Big piece, we always do the interpretation guide. We always do frequently asked questions. We do a whole whack of understanding guidelines. That's all on our Participate platform. The great thing is, as of August this year, everybody that's certified gets Participate for free. So if you're certified, get in touch with us, contact us. If you haven't got access to that, we'll make sure you get it. Huge wealth of information. So that's all I want to say about that one. When it comes to training, you guys do a lot of training courses. I cannot stress enough how good the training, how good it is to get that training. There are a number of different courses. I'll be honest, probably one of our most popular courses is that 5-day lead auditor course, even for sites, because that way I'm getting audit skills. I'm understanding what the auditors know. If you've had training before, you're going to get the conversion course, but people who have not had BRC training before, the 2 days good. It's explaining the standard. That 5-day is really in depth. Antonio, I think you've done that one a couple of times as well, and given that, and it's pretty in depth.
Yes.
And then last but not least, we're first time we've ever been in California as well. You guys have your conference. We're going to be shortly following yours. If people are able to come to that as well, absolutely love to have them. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to you guys.
Sure. And I got just a couple of slides here. So this is a listing. I know it's a bit of an eye chart, but it's a listing of some of our upcoming courses. So you can see we've got, we've got BRC, we've got some FSMA courses, got a number of other ones, pesticide safety training, and that is more around getting credits toward the California licenses, the QAL, QAC. And this is not even a comprehensive list. I would encourage you all to check out our website because we have a lot more courses than this as well coming up, and we're always adding more. We also do we do have the streaming courses as well, the web-based, and we have a lot of the produce safety courses for FSMA compliance for those that maybe are involved in growing operations or buy from growers as well. But do check out our website, the events page or section. And then Safe Food California, this is our annual event. Again, this is something that John usually comes to every year. It's a great event to really just dig in and focus on food safety and regulatory and on leadership in the food industry. And in 2 days to get kind of a complete update on what's the latest in all these different areas. We'll talk about, food fraud, adulteration, regulatory changes. As I said, some leadership topics as well. We'll have, prior to the event, we'll have the FSVP course, the 2-day course for importing foods. And so just a lot of great information that we have there. So definitely check out the website for that as well. And so I think that brings us to our Q&A section. And so a couple of quick notes again. We are recording this. We will be sending it out to attendees. We'll make it available on our website as well. And of course, the web-based courses we have are internal auditing, root cause analysis, environmental monitoring, which we've talked about and we have some questions on too. In the context of FSMA is what our webinar is about, and then HACCP's coming soon. And we will be sending out a survey too. So you'll receive a survey in your email. Please take a look, complete that. We definitely want your feedback because we want to get better. We want to keep having these webinars, and we want to stay interactive and help you to understand what you need to do. And so let me jump over to the questions that are coming in here, John, because we've got quite a number of them. So back when we were talking about environmental monitoring, they were asking, does this have to be done by a certified lab?
The day-to-day testing, absolutely not. If you think of environmental monitoring, it's a huge piece of things. There's visual, there's ATP, and then there's specific micro targeting swabs that you want to do. So there's a bunch of stuff. What the general recommendation would be is that you involve an accredited lab in the validation of what you're doing. So if you're taking, as you said, you're taking 25 swabs a month, maybe 10 a year, you're going to duplicate and send out to an accredited lab just to make sure you're in the ballpark. Because the last thing you want to do is spend 4 years doing in-house testing and then realize that something's not right and you're getting false information. So does it have to go to an accredited lab? Absolutely not. Does the lab, do you have to use recognized methods? Yes. Should you use an accredited lab as part of your ring testing or proficiency testing? Absolutely part of it.
Definitely. Okay, so another one, what repercussions or implications could there be for a redraft of the standards once the UK and so BRC leaves the EU? I'm not quite
I was wondering if you're going to read that one. Remember,
if I understand what they're asking on that one.
well, I mean, you know, there's a potential. There's Brexit going on. In reality, we're a global standard. We're not owned by the British government. We're no longer part of the British Trade Association. So we are a global standard. So if the UK happens to leave the EU at some point, it will have absolutely zero impact on food safety from a BRC perspective.
Great, great. Okay, so the next one, for environmental monitoring, are drains still going to be a main focus? In my opinion, equipment, floors, and other areas are more important than drains. That's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah, Antonio, I want to hear your perspective on this one.
That'd be a good one for you to talk on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the equipment definitely, because you have to, that's where the greater risk is at, right? You know, depending on the design, the materials, the ways they're used, the cleaning and sanitation protocols and all that. So what you want to make sure is that, especially your, you know, close to your food contact areas, there are not niches or harborage places. So you really want to focus on, you know, places on the machinery and equipment where it is difficult to reach and what you might think, you know, maybe cleaning and sanitation is not getting here. And, you know, that's part of your, maybe your visual and your pre-op inspections could help you to drive you also where you should be looking, where residues are being left and things like that. And, but, you know, another important part of that is also looking at the techniques of cleaning and sanitation, because that could be a good source, if not properly used, you know, to spread contamination throughout the facility and the equipment. So, and the drains are still an important part, because you certainly want to know that you don't have anything there anywhere in your facility. So at the end, you have your facility typically broken into 4 different zones, but definitely, you know, those that are closer to food are the most impactful, but activities and the rest of the environment definitely, you know, also should be part of the assessment, you know, when designing your environmental monitoring program.
Well, when we talk about food safety, right, if you want to sound like an expert in food safety, we always tell people just answer, it depends, right? When
It's really based on risk.
True, right? It really
it's
depends.
Based on risk.
I would just add in a wet facility, right? Yeah. With a sensitive product, let's say we're doing produce or something like that, and it's washed down, or we're making ice cream, right? If there's something in your plant, typically it's going to land in the drains anyway. So the drains are a great indicator, right? But in a dry facility with a product that is prone to dust, baking plant, something like that, the drains are a different story, aren't they? Maybe they're not quite as
existing even.
Yep.
Yeah, and so really it comes down to risk, doesn't it? It really depends on what you're trying to do and what the risk is in your facility.
I think you hit it right. The drains are a collection point. So, you know, one would expect to find something in the drain at some period, but that's the type of thing where maybe you're going to select some specific drains because of their location, and you're going to watch them as a trend. That we found some, but suddenly when you see levels in a drain starting to peak or starting to grow beyond typical, that could be an indicator that, okay, never mind the drain, there's something else going on that's feeding that drain that's giving us those results. So yeah, I'm with I think it was Courtney asked that one again. I'm not a big fan of just looking at drains as a on their own, but they're an indicator of other things.
Yeah. We got a question from Pete. Hey, Pete, long time no speak. Good to hear from you. Is it ideal to base on the risk involved in determining the sampling frequency and the number of samples to take for environmental monitoring? Right. So is it basically, does it need to be risk-based, it sounds like, in terms of the number of samples and where to take them? Right. And we kind of already touched on that, didn't we, John?
Yeah, I think that absolutely. So remember, question number 1, the auditor is going to have after saying, show me what your, tell me about your environmental monitoring program is, why did you select these frequencies? Why did you select these numbers? Why did you select these locations? So be able to talk, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So make sure we've got, you've got a good, and it should all be based on risk. So you should be able to identify, and maybe it's going to fluctuate. Maybe, in more the northern climates, you're going to say, well, in the winter, we're going to pull down a little bit, and in the summer, we're going to pick up because we've got more incoming or things like that. So it absolutely should be risk-based.
Right, and if I go into a facility and they're swabbing and all their swabs are for E. coli 0157H7, right? I mean, they're swabbing for one specific species. It really doesn't work well as an indicator, right? It's a positive or negative on one pathogen, right? So really it is, again, based on risk and what makes sense. So.
Yep, absolutely.
So we've probably beat that one to death at this point. You know, it's a topic I think that's close to our hearts because it's just so important for risk and food safety. So the next question we have, and I would say, you know, if you've got any more questions, you know, please go ahead and submit them, keep them coming in, because this is the last one we have right now, which is, can we find a gap analysis checklist for BRC issue 8 on the BRC website?
Absolutely. BRCglobalstandards.com. It should be on there. I will admit, like many companies, our website may sometimes give a few challenges in how do you find that. So any questions about getting a hold of that, if you can't find it on our website, get the good folks at Safe Food Alliance a call. They'll get you a copy of it.
Yeah, and I think we can go ahead and make a note to send that out to
yeah, absolutely.
follow up to the webinar. It's pretty straightforward. Your website, any website can be tricky to find things, but I have had no problems with the BRC website in terms of you guys have so many great tools available out there. I think the one trick is sometimes people might want to go to the BRC main website when really you want to go to the BRC bookshop. Right.
Well, that checklist is on the main website. Yep, the standard. You're right. And there you go. There's the trick. The standard is on the bookshop. The checklist is on the main website, and they should both be on participate. So again, I got to remind everybody: if you're certified, you should have a login to participate. If not, get in touch with us, and we'll make sure you get that.
Great. All right. So with that, we don't have any more questions. So John, I really just thank you for your time and your valuable input. You know, in the changes to the new issue of BRC. And I think this was it was a great introduction for everyone. Again, I would encourage everybody to take the conversion course at the very minimum, if not the full course. We do have one more question. Does BRC still have the interpretation guidelines? And yes, that you do, right? That's what's available in the BRC Participate.
Absolutely. Downloadable on Participate.
And we have a greetings from Mexico as well. So greetings to you as well. Thank you for sitting in. It was very nice to have. And our friend Antonio here is also from Mexico. So yeah, I don't know if you want to say hello in Spanish to him.
Hola y gracias.
Anyway, great to have you all, and feel free to reach out with questions. We love to interact and we love to help.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it.